Hi, I'm Josh Rushing, filling in for Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, Ireland's abortion debate is all over the streets and social media, but what's the government going to do? Anushay Hossain is here filling in for Malika as our digital producer. She covers global women's issues on her blog, Anushay's Point. Anushay, this conversation's been hot on Twitter all weekend long. What are you seeing in our community?
Yes, Josh, no matter what side of the debate people are on, they all seem to be feeling for the loss of Savita. I have a tweet here from Juan Carlos. He says, "I feel so sorry for Savita's family. She'd be alive today if she were in another country." So if you at home want to join our conversation, please tweet me using the hashtag AJStream.
Joining us at the table is Neil O'Dowd, founder of IrishCentral.com, a leading news site for the Irish American community. Neil, welcome.
Thank you.
Now, there are many ways that you can follow the stream, and one of those is Google+. And these people, all from Ireland, are hanging out with us today. Add us to your circles, and you, too, could be in the stream.
Hello, my name is Mats Brugger. I'm a Danish filmmaker. My latest film is called The Ambassador, and I am in the stream.
Never again. That's what thousands chanted in Ireland this weekend. They want to change the country's strict abortion laws following the death of Savita Halappanavar. Look at this tribute to Savita. That clip gives you a small sense of the depth of emotion around this case. Thanks to Christopher Tierney for creating and sharing it. Last month, Savita arrived at the Galway hospital reportedly already miscarrying. After begging for a termination, she was denied an abortion and allegedly told, "This is a Catholic country." Days later, she died from blood poisoning. Her husband believes an abortion may have saved her life. According to an Irish Supreme Court ruling, abortion can only be carried out to save the life of a mother. But that decision was never put into law, leaving what many say is a gray area over when an abortion may be legally performed. Pro-life supporters say the law is clear and needs no change. Activists on both sides of the issue have been discussing the case using the hashtag Savita, and it's gotten intense. So let's get started. Sarah McCarthy is the spokesperson for Galway Pro-Choice. Dr. Sean O'Donnell is the director of the Life Institute in Dublin. Welcome. Sarah, this weekend saw tens of thousands in the streets. What's the pro-choice community looking for?
The immediate need is obviously legislation to reflect the X case. It's been 20 years since the Supreme Court said that women in Ireland have a right to an abortion if their life is at risk, but 6 successive governments have failed to implement legislation to reflect this, and that is the most urgent need at the moment.
Can you give us just a brief background? I know Case X is a big part of this story, and I think most of our international audience may not know exactly what Case X is. Can you wrap that up for us?
Yeah, no problem. So X was a 14-year-old rape victim who was prevented from having an abortion by the Irish state. Her parents took her to England, and while there they contacted the Gardaí to see if they would be able to use the fetus as evidence in the criminal proceedings against her rapist, and the Attorney General ordered them to return back to Ireland, where once they returned they placed an injunction on her travelling for 9 months. And her parents obviously challenged this, took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, X was suicidal, and she said that if she was forced to carry through with the pregnancy, she would end her own life. And the Supreme Court ruled that this threat of suicide constituted a risk to the life of the mother. But since then, no government has ever implemented legislation to reflect this or to lay out a procedure when the life of the mother is at risk.
Sarah, I just want to clarify, because I think it was less than clear when I introduced you. You are not, in fact, from Dublin. You're in Dublin today, but you're from Galway, where the hospital where Savita died is. So that this is a local issue for you.
Yeah,
Anastasia,
absolutely.
what's the community saying about it?
Our online community has a lot to say about it. I have a tweet here from Juan Carlos. He's saying that religion-infused imposed laws similar to other Western European countries 30 years ago. Women's health should be women's decision. I also have a Facebook comment from Christine. She said, people have voted to protect the mother's life, and we have waited 20 years for the cowardly governments to change the legislation accordingly to protect doctors. This has to happen, and it has to happen now before another Civita is lost. So, Colette, I want to pose this question to you. Would you agree that it is now more urgent than ever? It is now more urgent than ever to remove barriers between women and their reproductive health care?
Yeah, I mean, this has been an urgent issue for the last 20 years. And even in the X case judgment in 1992, one of the judges who delivered that verdict said the failure of the government at that point to introduce legislation wasn't just unfortunate, it was inexcusable. 6 years later, we had another case, the C case, and in that instance, the judge in that case said that she didn't want the High Court to turn into a licensing authority for abortion. So vulnerable women, desperately ill women, forced to go to the High Court to try and determine their rights to a lawful abortion in their own country. The European Court of Human Rights has found that there's a lack of clarity as to what constitutes a real and substantial risk to the life, because that's the phraseology that's used in the Constitution. But I suppose if you're a doctor, at what point does a real risk to health develop into a risk to life? Because it's only at that point that they're legally allowed to offer women an abortion. And for doctors in this area, it's a grey area, and doctors have been coming out this week and saying, you know, there's a real fear of professional sanction and criminal sanction if their decisions are retrospectively challenged by maybe an inquiry, or if somebody complains. So, I mean, it's absolutely essential that there's legal clarity and that legislation finally belatedly is introduced. I mean, this isn't just this is a human rights issue, not just a medical issue, and it's long past time that the Irish government dealt with this issue.
Colette, you're a columnist at the Irish Examiner. I know you've been tweeting a lot about this because I follow you on Twitter. When you talk about doctors being scared of performing an abortion because they're worried about being prosecuted because of the gray area created, I'm curious, are there any examples of that since Case X came out? Have there been doctors there that have been prosecuted for that?
There haven't been, as far as I know, there haven't been. But what we've had this week is a lot of women going on talk radio in this country and telling about their experiences with the medical profession. And there's kind of what a euphemism for do you want an abortion in this country is, here's your file, you might want to travel. And this is what desperately ill women are being told by their doctors. Doctors, they're just a real kind of fear, because obviously it's a huge issue for them. They could be struck off the medical register, and you know their entire career could be ruined. Just for the sake of political cowardice and politicians being too afraid to tackle this issue.
Sean O'Donnell, can I bring you into the conversation here? One, why does Ireland seem out of step with the rest of the EU and with the US on this issue? Ireland has some of the strictest anti-abortion laws. And do you agree with what Colette said there, with it is cowardice from the politicians to not deal with this issue?
Well, I think I should probably first of all address the last thing she mentioned in relation to the doctors being scared to act in case they get struck off. Now, we've had two very, very clear statements, one from the head of the Institute of Obstetricians and Gynecologists last week, where she stated that there's absolutely no confusion amongst doctors in relation to the actions that they can take to preserve the life and or health of the mother. The second statement was from Professor Kieran Murphy, who's the head of the Medical Council, and he stated that the wording in the Medical Council ethics guidelines are absolutely clear, and in fact they were so clear that they won an award for their clarity of English. So there is no confusion amongst medical professionals.
Well, wait, Sean, if it's so clear, then why not go ahead and put it into law?
Is considered as paramount. The problem is that you might end up handcuffing doctors by trying to put in the list of potential complications that can arise in pregnancy, and that list, you might put in 25 conditions that are complications, and find then that there's a 26th. What we do know is that in 20 years, since the X case judgment, that we haven't had one woman, and I include all cases, we haven't had one woman who has been deemed to have lost her life as a result of our ban on abortion. And that's quite clear. Nobody has argued the case otherwise, and they try to, if you like, suggest that we're sending women who are extremely ill to England so that they can receive their medical care there. That would be not just irresponsible, but it would be unforgivable. We have the highest standard of obstetric care, and we also have consistently had the best maternal mortality rates. We've been within the top 5 for the last 20 years. So even UNICEF have acknowledged that.
I'm going to pull in our online community here for a second. I have a tweet from Ioha. He says, abortion is wrong, but the country can put a law that can allow when a life is at risk. I also have a tweet here from Gopi. He said, Savita's death is unacceptable and excruciatingly painful. Doctors should hang their religious coats outside the operating theater. I have a video question from our online community that I'd like us all to take a listen to. Let's have a listen to Sinead.
Sinead Redmond, Ireland. Savita Halappanavar died unnecessarily because of laws constraining Irish women's bodies. This is completely unacceptable in the year 2012. Our bodies have value. We are not equivalent to fetuses. We have rights, and they will be vindicated. Thousands of men and women have come together across Ireland and internationally recently to make sure that this never happens again. Help us. Join us.
So Rory Fitzgerald, you're a journalist and attorney in court. You believe that the law is clear and does not need changing. So I want to pose this next question to you. What do you think it says about a society that in this day and age would deny a woman, a living, breathing woman, access to medical procedure that could have saved her life?
Well, first I have to take issue with that. I mean, I'm not on either side of the fence on this issue. But what I do believe is that I welcome the fact in a way that there's a discussion, although it's around such tragic circumstances. However, we need to go back and look at the facts in this situation. And the first fact is that it has been widely reported around the world that Savita died because she was denied an abortion. As of yet, this is unknown. I mean, Kitty Holland, who wrote the story, recently wrote in The Guardian, quote, whether the fact that Savita had been refused termination was a factor in her death has yet to be established. So, we need to get the facts straight first, and from there, I think, hopefully a civil discussion will develop in the country, because there is a need for some clarity, I do believe.
Roy mentions how this is being reported around the rest of the world. You run a website here for the Irish American community, which is large. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I know more people report to be Irish in America than actually in Ireland, right?
Yes, 40 million Irish Americans.
So how is this playing out to the Irish American community?
It's a huge story. It was on page 3 of the New York Times. It's led our website every day for almost a week now because of the tragedy, the human tragedy, and that's what we're all forgetting about here. We're getting caught up in the issue of laws. But I think of the woman who was suffering this pain for 3 days while a non-viable fetus still had a heartbeat, and this was the reason why she had to go through this terrible suffering. That's what's getting people, is the human story, this vital, beautiful woman that you showed from India, a dentist in Ireland, part of this new great immigrant community into Ireland, and she meets this horrific death, which throws us all back to the dark ages in Ireland as to how this happened. And obviously there'll be lots of committees and inquiries, but you can't get that image, and that's the image that people over here are seeing, this vibrant young woman who died in childbirth or died after an abortion was delayed. And why did that happen? That's the issue that people are asking.
So wait, what does this mean for Ireland's international image?
It's not good for Ireland. Ireland's had a very tough time. This church has been under enormous pressure because of child abuse scandals. Economy has been tanking. And now you bring back this sort of old dragon, this issue of abortion, which has been hanging around in Ireland since 1983, basically, since the first referendum. And every few years, because, and I agree with several of the participants, the non-negotiating stance of successive governments, where they will just not deal with this issue. And this cowardice has ended up in this issue, once again flaming across the headlines across the world. And it is bad news for Ireland, no
I want
question.
to pick up on this international theme. I have a tweet from Akash. He says, if pro-lifers don't want a fetus to die, why do they want the mother to? And you just hit upon this theme of immigration. So what role do you think race has played in this case?
I don't think race has played a role. I think, when you read the media reports, this is clearly an issue where a woman underwent horrific pain for 3 days when an abortion should have been performed. That would seem to be the logical thing, because it was legally possible for the doctors to do so. And I think that's really the key thing that keeps coming back to me from my readers is, why did this happen? Not so much, but the image of the woman, this beautiful young Indian woman settling in Ireland. Ireland is very proud of the fact that it's absorbing so many immigrants. And she was very successful and loved in the hometown of Westport in Mayo, where she was a dentist. And this horrible fate. And now you have, protests outside the Irish embassy, the Irish ambassador called in India. And it's just bad news for Ireland as a whole. Michael,
Savita's husband says that when they requested an abortion, that they were told it couldn't happen because it was a quote, this is a Catholic country. What role did the church play in the events leading to Savita's death?
They played an absolutely shameful role, from supporting the unnecessary so-called pro-life referendum back in the 1980s to just literally as Savita was dying, the Catholic bishops were promoting an immoral propaganda campaign to mislead Irish people into believing that there's no need for legislation and into believing that pregnant women will always get the medical care that they need in Ireland. And at the same time, the Irish politicians, who don't seem to realise that the country has already become a lot more secular and a lot less religious than it used to be, don't realise that they have to catch up with that reality and are still pandering to the conservative Catholic ethos. It took a raped, suicidal, pregnant teenager to establish the right in 1992 that women have a right to an abortion if their life is in danger. It shouldn't have taken the death of a pregnant woman 20 years later to remind Irish politicians that they should get away from the conservative Catholic Church and legislate to vindicate that right.
Sean, why shouldn't Savita have been able to request the procedure that she wanted? Why shouldn't she have had that authority over her own body?
It's not that she shouldn't have had the authority to request a procedure. There's a massive amount of misinformation that's been emanating out from our shores and abroad that somehow or other that an abortion would have saved Savita's life. The tragedy of Savita's life is something that isn't lost upon people who value human life. And those of us who do value human life, both before and after birth, very much regret the tragic events that happened in Galway. But what I would say very clearly is that there's absolutely no indication in this country at this time that Savita's life would have been saved by access to abortion. The
so
inquiries will obviously
there, because regardless of whether it would have been, you can't really say. I know that they're setting up an investigation to see, but the fact is she requested the procedure and was denied the procedure. So she was denied it, and it was something that she wanted. Those are the facts you can't get around, right, Sean?
Well, we don't know if they're the facts yet, because all we've had is kind of second and third hand reports. But what we do know is that if the clinicians who were involved in her care, they would have made a decision as to whether or not the terminating the pregnancy at that time was going to be would lead to an improvement in her condition or not. And if it's a case that she had this infection, Savita died from septicemia. She didn't die from pregnancy. So it was very likely that, and this has been reported in the papers, it was very likely that an earlier delivery of the child, whether the child was viable or not, would not actually have saved her life.
Sarah, is this a matter of malpractice and not a matter of pro-choice?
No, absolutely not. I mean, doctors are in an impossible situation. I would refute the speaker's earlier points. You have a number of articles by doctors coming up all over the place saying that they feel themselves they are in an impossible situation. On the one hand, they have the Supreme Court ruling, but on the other hand, the 1861 Act, which criminalizes abortion and those who help women to get it. And it's just an absolutely impossible situation for doctors. And also, we do know for sure that Savita requested a termination. Her and her husband requested several times that the fetus be terminated. And like, it's described as her friends that she begged for a termination, but she was refused it by doctors. Savita's cervix was left open for over 80 hours. Any doctor will tell you that this dramatically increases the risk of infection, which is what Savita died from. Had the termination been carried out days before when it should have been, there's an extremely high chance that it would have saved her life. And I refute the earlier speaker's claims that it's not clear.
Michael Nugent, this shouldn't be of surprise, right? Because in 2010, the European Court of Human Rights said that this was likely to happen because no law had followed after the Supreme Court decision about case X. Is that right, Michael?
Yeah, well, what the European Court of Human Rights said is that there is a right to abortion in Ireland if the life of a woman is at risk. But that because the government had refused to legislate for so long, that a woman cannot vindicate that right because there's no procedure for her to determine whether or not she qualifies for it. So when Savita said that she wanted an abortion, because of the lack of legislation, there was no mechanism for her to find out whether or not she was legally entitled to it or not. And as an aside, even if she hadn't died and even if her life hadn't been at risk, it was disgraceful that she had to be put through 3 days of that agony and pain and suffering.
Our online community is agreeing with you, Michael. I have a tweet here from Steve. He said, so many men arguing about something they'll never experience. I also have a tweet here from Matt. He's saying Ireland will only change these laws with approval from within Rome. There's no room for this kind of death in 2012. So Colette, I want to pose that question to you. Would you agree? I mean, is the government of Ireland waiting for some kind of go-ahead from the Vatican itself?
No, I wouldn't say that. What's happening at the moment is that after the European Court of Human Rights delivered that verdict that the Irish state had breached a woman's human rights in not having a guideline or a formula for her to determine her right to an abortion, the government convened an expert group to examine its options. Now, that expert group was supposed to deliver its report in July. Then it was given an extension until the end of September. And then very mysteriously, on the very night that this story broke, the expert group report suddenly appeared. So some of us think that's a bit of a coincidence. But in any event, that report will likely be published next week. But the only kind of credible options that are available to the government at this point are really introducing legislation or else have another referendum to further restrict the rights of women. Now, the government have tried that before. In 2002, there was a referendum in this country which sought to deny suicidal women the right to an abortion. The people said no, the people refused to pass that, but still the government didn't act. So really, 20 years after the X case and 30 years after the 1983 constitutional amendment, it really is time for this government finally to act. I just make another point as well. In 1983, when that constitutional amendment was passed, divorce was illegal in Ireland. Homosexuality was a crime in Ireland. Irish society has completely changed. Recent opinion polling has shown that 80% of Irish people would favour legislation to give effect to the X case judgment. There was an opinion poll among GPs last year which found that 75% of GPs would support legislation to give effect to the X case judgment. And also they go further. They wanted legislation so that women whose health is at risk could have an abortion. I mean, I'm not sure whether the international community is aware of it, but this legislation and the legislation that's so controversial in this country is just about saving a woman's life. So only offering an abortion if a woman's life depends on it. Irish women who want or whose health is damaged by their pregnancy will still have to travel, and still largely up to 5,000 women every year are going to the UK to access abortion services in that country.
I'm going to stop you right there. We're going to continue this conversation in our online post show. I want to thank Neil, Sean, Sarah, for being on today. But don't go away. Like I said, this conversation will continue at stream.aljazeera.com. And then on Tuesday, a rising number of U.S. children are being given study drugs to boost their academic performance. Are attention deficit disorder drugs being overprescribed? Until then, we'll see you online. Welcome back. Welcome back. This is the Streams Online Post Show. We've been talking about the abortion debate in Ireland. I want to get back to it. I'd like to go back to Michael. I was looking at some stats about the Catholic Church in Ireland. It seems in 1990, 81% went to weekly mass. 2006, that number is down to 48%. So a drop in nearly half. It seems like the Catholic Church is losing power and influence in Ireland. Will this be a watershed moment there?
Well, I think it's part of a process rather than a watershed. Another interesting statistic about Irish Roman Catholics in a recent poll is that 8% of Irish Roman Catholics say that they don't believe in God. So I think the figure is probably even lower than the statistics suggest. But I think Ireland is a lot more secular than it used to be. Politicians need to recognise that, and they need to move. But this shouldn't really be just about the church. This is a women's rights issue, and it's kind of odd, really, that the discussion centres around, how it affects the church, how it affects politicians, how it affects doctors, where the focus should really be on how it affects pregnant women.
Sean, is the organization you're with, it's called the Life Institute, is it connected to the Catholic Church?
No, it's not in any way connected to the Catholic Church.
Is it connected to U.S.?
No, it's an independent organisation that was set up by myself and some others who've been involved in the abortion debate for, in my case, 30 years, and we've been, if you like, accumulating data and engaging in debate over that 30 years, and following on from that, there are younger organisations who use the materials that we provide in order to engage with the next generation. And it's quite clear from Ireland as well as from abroad that the mood in terms of abortion is very much moving to the pro-life side. Anyone who sets foot in Washington in January of any year will see that there are hundreds of thousands of people attending for the March for Life there. One of the things
but Sean, that seems really surprising
needs to
because
be taken into account is that
you're really out of step with the rest of the world when it comes to this issue, at least out of step with the rest of Europe and the U.S. You have the strictest laws on abortion there. So to say that it feels like it's shifting your way, from the point of view here, it seems as if Ireland's behind the times on this. Anusha, what is the community saying about that?
Well, our community is hopeful and seems to be agreeing. It says, I have a tweet, from Marseille. He says, Irish Parliament vote on rights tomorrow. We want them to vote yes to Savita law #, so no other woman dies in these circumstances. So do you think that the debate, which is starting in the Parliament tomorrow, is supposed to be a 48-hour debate, is going to bring about some legal changes?
I think it's possible. The level of publicity that this particular case has forced the politicians to come out from behind their curtains and actually argue this issue. And it's really been one that they have avoided like the plague, because I have a brother, a senior figure in politics in Ireland, and he will tell you that no other issue causes as much emotional turmoil among constituents as this issue. So from that point of view, I think it's definitely, they simply have to come out from hiding and deal with this issue for once and for all, because what happened to Savita could happen again with terrible consequences.
Sarah McCarthy, I read something off of the Life Institute's website that said that the pro-choice movement in Ireland was being funded by wealthy Americans. Is that the case? Do you feel some kind of influence from the U.S. on this issue?
No, that's not true at all. Galway Pro-Choice is a completely autonomous organisation that was only set up over the summer. We actually have no money at all. It is true that the anti-choice pro-life movement in Ireland is heavily funded by US organisations. So I'm curious why they're throwing that accusation at us when in fact it's true of themselves.
John, did you hear that?
No, that's entirely untrue. Yeah, it's entirely untrue. I mean, the reality is that the pro-choice, the abortion campaigners in Ireland have been receiving funding for many years from organisations such as Atlantic Philanthropies. So, you know, Chuck Feeney and George Soros and people like that have been donating money to the pro-abortion lobby. The reality is that the pro-life movement in Ireland has been self-funding. And we've been self-funding from day one, because I opened up the first pro-life office in Dublin in 1992 with, you know, a few pieces of second-hand furniture. We haven't moved far beyond that because we put all of our finances into fighting campaigns, and these campaigns are you know, to make people aware of the issues. And I need to say very, very categorically that there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that legal abortion would have prevented the death of Savita. It's really important that people recognise that. Abortion did not kill Savita. Septicemia killed Savita. And, you know, linking it in, as always happens, is obviously just going to muddy the waters. The reality is that we live in a democracy, and the reason that the politicians, for various reasons, I suppose, haven't legislated is because they're aware of the fact that a majority of people in this country still oppose abortion, and a majority of people would still vote against abortion. And the idea that Irish people would support abortion to any great extent is only reflected when the question asked is, would you support termination of pregnancy where a mother's life is at risk? And people will then say, yes, we would. But then again, so would all of us. And that's why the Medical Council and the Institute of Obstetrician and Gynecologists.
For a second, I have a tweet from Mayor Leach. She says it's a joke to say there's no grey area legally with abortion. Savita's case shows that the dying fetus's heartbeat caused confusion. So Rory, I wanna go and give you a question. What role do you think technology has had in sharing this story and bringing this story to the attention of the whole world?
I mean, technology has changed this debate around the world, and in Ireland in particular. You know, people are opened up to other ideas, but this story has spread in the most extraordinary way. But the other way that technology has changed the way we perceive this issue is that, you know, we get a better idea of what's going on in the womb these days. The way most of us now first see our own kids is on these scans. So, you know, that's affecting how say in the UK, the Tory party health minister has suggested bringing back from 24 weeks to 12 weeks, the time limit. And these are the kind of issues we're going to end up likely debating in Ireland in the coming years. It's going to be around time limits and gestations and I mean, you know, the European consensus appears to be around 12 weeks. But the activist groups who've been organising some of these protests their views go unreported. But many of them want abortion on demand up to the point of birth, you know, and I think that is also something that the Irish people, you know, really would not accept. You know, so all sides have to be told, have to have their side told. Everybody needs to put their cards on the table, I think, politically. And we need to see some clarity and honesty and openness from all actors, be they NGOs or political groups or churches or whoever's involved.
All right, Rory, we're gonna wrap this up here. I think we'll all be watching to see what Ireland does with this issue moving forward, and hopefully remembering what Savita went through in those last few days. On Tuesday, a rising number of U.S. children are being given study drugs to boost their academic performance. Are attention deficit disorder drugs being overprescribed? Until then, we'll see you online.